Welcome to the Sound of Economics. My name is Guntram Wolff and I'm the director of Bruegel, and in today's Director's Cut we discuss the economics of Brexit and in particular the economics of no-deal Brexit. Now, obviously the uncertainty is still very high as regards the outcome of the Brexit drama. We could see, I think, a number of different outcomes. One option is still that there will be an agreement on a deal, on a modified deal. One option is that the United Kingdom asks for an extension of the current Article 50, which would mean that Brexit was to be delayed. One option is a revocation of the notification of Article 50, which would mean the UK stays in the EU under the current terms. And the ECJ has confirmed, the European Court of Justice has confirmed that this option is actually possible without the consent of the European Union. So that would be certainly a revocation, but it would probably require, in terms of the British domestic affairs, not only a revocation and a repeal of the Repeal Act by the Parliament, but it would also require a referendum to be politically viable. So it's probably not a very likely outcome from my point of view, at least. And finally, there is, of course, the option of, which is, I think, the default option of leaving the European Union without an agreement on the 30th of March, which would mean the UK would be out of the European Union, out of all of the institutions, but also out of the single market basically in 2 months' time. Today I'm discussing with my colleague Zsolt Darvas, senior fellow here at Bruegel. I'm discussing the economics of no-deal Brexit, or the economics of really Brexit without any, let's say, trade agreement, without any near-term agreement. And we want to discuss the implications across a number of policy areas. I think it's easy to identify a few key areas where there will be an impact. So one key area is trade. One key area is citizens on both sides. One key area is budgetary implications. And one key area, and I'm sure that we will come to all the other areas. Now, let me start by asking Zsolt, and of course Ireland is the big issue. So the fourth is Ireland. So Ireland, trade, budget are all the big items we need to discuss. So perhaps Zsolt, let me turn to you. First of all, if you want to add anything to these introductory remarks, and would put the nuance somewhere else, but then let's start zooming in on the trade issues.
Trade issues are really important because the European Union is the largest trading partner of the United Kingdom, and also the UK is the place where many European manufacturers export several goods. But also, very importantly, there are lots of so-called value chains across the channel, which means that some intermediate products are, let's say, first produced in France, then it goes to the UK, then it comes back to Germany, then back to the UK. So lot of border crossing of various parts and components. And if there would be a no-deal Brexit, that would imply that from that day, the UK would be a third country from the perspective of the European Union, and all goods which cross the border between the United Kingdom and the rest of the European Union will be subject to customs checks. They could be also subject to customs duties, which is perhaps the smallest problem, because the rate of customs duty is a few percentage points. It's not that high, but that would be certain direct cost. But the custom procedure itself would require an enormous amount of administrative capacity both from businesses who actually do the trade, but also the governments in the European Union and also in the United Kingdom to complete and assess all of these customs declarations and make a decision. So that would likely cause an immediate negative impact on the trade flows between the EU and the UK. And also some goods where the tariffs are relatively high. For example, for cars, it's around 10% the tariff rate. That also could be a quite significant cost to importers. For example, German cars going to the UK or mini cars coming from the UK to the rest of the European Union could be immediately subject to a 10% customs duty, which could increase prices and can harm trade. Another important aspect is indeed relates to Ireland, because
well, let's move to Ireland in a minute. But indeed, I think you very well summarized the key issues on trade. So there's immediate, very significant logistical challenges. For example, the port of Dover would not be capable of doing customs controls for, I think, there's some 10,000 lorries that arrive there every day. So in very practical terms, it will take a couple of months, if not half a year or a year, until the capacity to process customs controls will actually be established on both sides. So my understanding is that on the EU side, member states have started to hire additional customs officers and so on, but the bottleneck may very well be on the UK side. Perhaps an additional aspect which I would like to highlight is that this is not just about doing customs controls and sort of collecting the customs duties. This is also about ensuring regulatory conformity of goods. So customs officers will have to perform checks as regards customs as regards the conformity with the regulations. There's phytosanitary and sanitary controls. There's veterinary controls. So this is actually a fairly complex issue and will, as I would argue, will raise significant customs and administrative and logistical challenges that will take time to sort out. But of course, once they have been sorted out, the logistical and administrative challenges, we are basically in the business of comparing the current relation with the relation under a WTO most favored nation agreement. And there, I think it's important to say that the UK and the EU have already notified the WTO that they want to both continue to apply the currently agreed MFN tariffs of the European Union. But there will be some debates at the WTO still on tariff quota, which is still a bit contentious. But on the tariffs, I think there will be basically no contention at the WTO. So the UK will then, as of 30th of March or whenever they really exit, impose MFN tariffs on its imports. And, that has some implications for trade. But I think I agree with your assessment, Zsolt, that tariffs are not that high that it would be a huge drama for trade overall. It will be in some sectors. You mentioned the 10% tariff on cars, and I think there we will see quite some trade effects, and that will be painful, especially given the value chains that you described. Now, let me, Zsolt, turn to the more thorny issue and frankly speaking, the most worrying issue of the whole no deal Brexit, which is the situation in Ireland. In my view, once the UK leaves the European Union without an agreement, Ireland will have to impose border checks towards North Ireland if it wants to ensure the integrity of the single market. And there's an if here, which signals that the integrity of the single market requires border controls. But there's still a choice that Irish authorities will have to take. And the Irish Prime Minister, Leo Varadkar, has already said, no matter what the outcome, there will be no border in Ireland. Now, I think the statement is actually incompatible with the integrity of the single market, and I would suspect there will be some form of infringement procedure vis-a-vis Ireland. But Zsolt, perhaps you see it differently. How do you see that situation evolve in Ireland?
The Irish border question is perhaps the most contentious part of the whole Brexit debate. And I would separate the issue into two. One, to movement of people, and the second, to movement of goods. Regarding movement of people, I think the situation is easier because Ireland is not part of the Schengen travel area, where many other European Union member states are part of, which means that if, let's say, someone from Belgium travels to Ireland, there is a check of passport. But if someone from Ireland goes to the UK, Northern Ireland or rest of the UK, there are no checks. So I think if this situation will prevail, that the United Kingdom and Ireland will continue to form a single travel area for people, then at least for people, the issue of border is less of an issue. But if people carry, large bags, then that can be already an issue, because indeed, as you mentioned, for the integrity of the single market, if Northern Ireland as part of the United Kingdom will be outside of the EU, then there has to be checks. Now, indeed, the question, who will do these controls? Will the Irish government at the end of the day recognize its obligation to do that? Would the United Kingdom government and parliament recognize that indeed, if they want to protect the borders of the United Kingdom, then has to be checks? So one question is whether Ireland and the United Kingdom would be able to cooperate on border checks, but also on how the border checks would be actually conducted. So would there be basically stops at the border, every second lorry is stopped and checked, or they try to find some more sophisticated IT-based solutions whereby certain lorries are checked a few kilometers away from the border, or they try to use information what the lorry actually carries, whether that good is in conformity with regulations in both sides of the border. So even if a hard border or a customs border will have to be introduced between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, there are some options which can help to avoid, the difficulties that border stops could cause.
But can I just push you on that point? I mean, I think it's an important point, and it's been very much debated in the UK, especially, with lots of people claiming, we can have a borderless border, and that view was never fully substantiated in the sense that nobody really could explain how it works. Now, if I think of the border between Switzerland and the EU, for example, Switzerland and Germany, what I note is that there is a border, but there's no border control officers. So basically, there's no customs officers. Basically, you can just cross the border without being checked, at least at the small border posts. But there is a border post, and from time to time there are random controls for the small roads. While if you think of the big highways, of course there's border controls, and there's basically a system that allows the Swiss and the German authorities to check the license plates of the lorries, and the transport company actually has to inform ex ante the authorities that their lorry will come and that's what is in their lorry. And if the transport company is well known and trusted, then probably there's only very rare random checks. Having said that, there must be some random checks in order to ensure the compliance. So at the end of the day, you still need, one way or another, you need some physical controls. You're right, you can push them 5 kilometers away from the border, but at the end of the day, without any random checks, without any controls, and without notification systems, this will be a gray border, and the integrity of the single market will not be protected. And let me give the floor to all of this. I think can only work with significant implementation time. So there's just no way that all the options that you describe will be there on the 30th of March. Is there?
No, I agree very much with everything you said. And let me add another important point concerning the border between Switzerland and the EU, is that Switzerland and the EU has a very large degree of regulatory harmonization. There are more than 100 sectoral deals between the UK and Switzerland. So Switzerland is not part of the single market, but shadowing single market regulations in many, many industries. And certainly this also makes it much easier to have just random checks instead of continuous checks at the border. So it also has the implication for the Irish border issue that this relatively light border control can only happen if the UK and the EU continue to maintain a very large degree of regulatory harmonization. Now, for the start, it shouldn't be a problem because they start from the same place. I mean, currently, the UK fully complies. I mean, it's part of the single market, fully complies with all European Union regulations. And the day after Brexit, it will be the same. But in time, there could be a difference between the regulatory regimes in the two areas. And certainly, if the divergence is becoming bigger and bigger, then the frequency of border checks at the Irish border will have to be larger and larger.
Okay, a third area I think which we need to discuss is sector-specific issues. I think let me only perhaps very quickly talk about this, and then we turn to the EU budget. So the sector-specific issues, I just want to give one example, which is the airlines and aviation. Now, without any deal without any deal, UK-based airlines will not be able to fly to the EU, let alone fly within the EU. Now, to mitigate that impact, which would be dramatic for London Heathrow and the major airports of the UK, so to mitigate that, the European Commission has proposed a draft regulation which would need to be adopted by 29th of March, that would allow UK-based airlines to actually fly to the EU, but it would be actually quite limited. It would not allow those UK-based airlines to provide flights within the EU. So there's a big debate on Iberia. Iberia is owned, a Spanish airline is owned by actually a British operator, IAG. And Iberia may be limited or may not be allowed to fly anymore within Spain. So from Madrid to Barcelona because of Brexit, even if the emergency regulation has passed. Another thing that will not be possible, even if the emergency legislation has passed, is that a British airline would use a European hub to fly to a third country. So, for example, if British Airways wanted to fly, let's say, to Argentina via Madrid, that would not be allowed anymore in the no-deal scenario, even if the emergency legislation is passed. So just to show, I mean, this is a hugely complex endeavor, and crashing out of the European Union will immediately have sectoral impacts, be it on aviation, be it on other industries, that are actually quite complicated to see. So then there is the budget, and of course we should also not forget citizens on both sides. But Zsolt, you have done a big computation of budgetary implications of no-deal Brexit. What does it mean for the EU budget, short-term, medium-term? Can you walk us through this?
The European Union has a 7-year multi-annual budget, which is called the multi-annual financial framework, which basically sets limits on how much the EU can spend during the 7-year period. The current one is running from 2014 to 2020, and the next one is supposed to run from 2021 to 2027. Now, the EU budget based on its multi-annual planning means that for each year, several payments are planned. For example, building bridges. Helping social cohesion, supporting research and development, helping small and medium-sized enterprises, improving the administrative capacity of certain government functions. So there are many different areas where the EU actually spends. And the big question is that if the UK leaves without a deal, whether the UK will contribute to the EU budget or not. I mean, this is a very difficult legal question, and the opinions of legal experts differ. Some say that no, the UK wouldn't have to pay a penny after it leaves. Others say that no, or yes, the UK has made commitments and it has to honor the commitments. We don't want to enter this legal question because it's very complicated, and even lawyers have disagreements. But what I did in my calculations is that I assume that after the date of exit, the UK will not pay at all to the EU. And also all EU projects will stop in the UK overnight. Now, both assumptions are very extreme. Because even if the UK would not have a legal obligation to pay, it might decide to pay in a unilateral way, for example, to show its goodwill towards the EU, in the hope of that, let's say, a year or 2 years later, a better deal will be agreed. Because if the UK would stop paying immediately, that would be viewed very negatively in the European Union. Also, EU payments to UK beneficiaries might not stop overnight because the EU has a legal contract, let's say, with the university in the United Kingdom, which is based on EU law. Now, if the UK leaves, the contract is still there. So again, it's a very difficult legal question that if the UK wouldn't contribute to the EU budget at all, whether the EU also has the right to stop all payments to the UK. But again, I don't want to enter
what are the numbers?
To the legal issues, but instead come to the numbers. So if the UK would fully stop paying to the EU budget and the EU would fully stop paying to UK-based beneficiaries, then in the rest of the current multi-annual financial framework, basically from April this year to December of next year, 2020, the total gap in the EU budget would amount to about 6.5 billion euros. Now, what would happen? Would member states pay more, or would planned payments have to be cut by that amount? Again, it's a question for discussion. But in my view, the planned payments will have to continue because they have been agreed and codified according to the EU law. So the question how this gap will be filled, and the answer is that very simply, member states would pay more. And the reason why the answer is simple is that the European Union has a limit on the amount of money the EU budget can collect from member state. And this limit is much higher than payments. This limit is about 1.2% of GDP, while payments is only about 1% of GDP. So there is a relatively large margin of 0.2% of GDP. And that would be more than sufficient to cover the gap that a lack of UK payment would cause. So in my view,
so legally possible.
This 16.5 billion euros would just be paid by other member states, and all payments, at least in the EU 27 countries, will continue as planned.
So legally, it will be possible to do this quite easily according to EU law. Politically, of course, it will not be seen as a friendly gesture from the UK, and certainly the net contributing countries in the European Union will feel quite angry that they have to pay more. We calculated Germany would pay 4 billion more until the end of 2020. But a smaller country like Austria would pay still half a billion. So budgetary committees in the national legislature would have to approve that. So it would be, I think, politically quite a big deal, even though in absolute terms these numbers are of course not very high, but the political signal would be there. Now, let me perhaps end by mentioning the huge uncertainty that a no-deal Brexit would create for citizens on both sides of the channel. there's roughly 5 million citizens on both sides of the channel, so British citizens in the EU and EU citizens in the UK that would be affected by a no-deal Brexit. And I think it will, as a first instance, create quite some uncertainty about their status, about their rights, about their accumulated rights, be it pension rights, be it social security rights, but also be it the rights to vote and so on. So a lot, I think, we should really not forget this important group of people that currently live and work on each side of the channel that will be affected one way or another by Brexit. So I think we've covered a wide range of topics. I'm sure we forgot and didn't mention a lot of issues, but I think what we tried to show is just how complex it is to leave the European Union and how multifaceted the implications of a departure from the European Union are. Thank you for listening today and stay tuned to our Bruegel podcast series. And thank you again. Bye-bye.